Hello, and welcome back to Idea Way. I'm Hayden, and today I want to bring together two ideas that I've talked about separately before on this podcast: infinite games and Naval Ravikant. Because the more I think about Naval's philosophy, the more I think he's one of the clearest modern examples of someone trying to live infinitely. Not just trying to build wealth, not just building a company, but building a life that actually lasts psychologically. A life that you can keep living without constantly needing to take breaks and escape from it. And I think that discussion matters because when most people hear Naval's name, they immediately think startups, investing money, the almanac of Naval Ravikant, and quotes on social media. But honestly, I think that misses the deeper point behind Naval entirely. Naval isn't really teaching people how to become rich. He's teaching people how to become free. And those are very different goals because a lot of people become wealthy while still being completely trapped by their status, by comparison, by anxiety, by needing external validation in their lives to feel like they made it. But Naval pushes back against that idea. He sees life modernly as full of invisible games which people never consciously chose to play. It's the same status games that people feel trapped by, prestige games, comparison loops, achievement cycles. And the scary part of these invisible games is that most people don't really realize that they're inside of them. They just inherit the rules behind these games automatically. Get good grades, get some title, get a promotion, get approval, get followers, get the appearance of success, then repeat these forever. And one of Naval's most famous lines is, "Play long-term games with long-term people," which sounds pretty simple at first, but the more you sit with that philosophy, the deeper it gets, because that sentence completely changes how you think about relationships, work, learning, reputation, and even identity. Because most people approach life through transactions. What can I get right now? What's the immediate payoff behind this idea, this learning? What do I gain? But long-term games don't operate like that. Long-term games require trust, patience, consistency, but most importantly, they require continuation. And that's the key idea behind James Carson's idea of infinite games. Infinite players cannot be obsessed with winning immediately. They're obsessed with staying in the game. And staying in the game changes your behavior. You stop burning bridges with people who could be important in the future for short-term advantages. You stop optimizing every decision for immediate status for you, and you stop treating people like temporary utilities. Because once you start thinking long-term, reputation matters, and reputation compounds. Trust compounds, relationships compound, judgment compounds, and even small actions compound. And I believe Naval understands this compounding better than almost anyone. Most people hear the word compounding and immediately think money, interest rates, investments, stocks, how much am I making? But Naval applies compounding to everything. Knowledge compounds, reading compounds, good habits compound, calmness compounds, the people around you compound, and even your thought patterns compound over years. And the reverse is true too. Anxiety compounds, distraction compounds, bad environments compound, short-term thinking compounds. One bad habit repeated for 10 years becomes personality. And I think that's why Naval focuses so heavily on leverage, because leverage is really about creating outcomes that continue working beyond your direct effort. He ranks leverage into a few categories: labor leverage, other people working for you; capital leverage, money working for you. But the most interesting category is what he calls permissionless leverage: code and media. A piece of software can help millions of people while its creator sleeps. A video can spread endlessly online. A podcast conversation can affect someone years after it was recorded. An idea can travel infinitely farther than the person who created it. And that's, in my opinion, the most fascinating shift in human history. For most of history, your impact was limited by physical presence. You had to physically be somewhere to create value there. Now, though, ideas scale, thoughts scale, authenticity scales. And that last part, authenticity, is important because Naval has this idea that the internet rewards people for being more uniquely themselves. I mean, that kind of sounds obvious when you think about it from a perspective of what people want to see, but it's honestly a radical shift. For a long time, success mostly came from fitting institutions, corporations, universities, climbing the career ladder. You succeeded by becoming legible and valuable to systems. But modern leverage often rewards uniqueness, being yourself instead. Specific perspectives, specific creativity, specific knowledge. And specific knowledge is probably one of Naval's most important concepts. He defines it as knowledge that can't be simply trained into somebody else. Knowledge that comes from genuine curiosity, natural obsession, your weird combinations of your interests and your experiences. And I love that idea because it removes this illusion that success is about becoming identical to everyone else at the top. In fact, the opposite is often what you have to strive for. The people who stand out are usually the people who leaned hardest into what genuinely interested them. Not what looked impressive, not what sounded prestigious, but what actually fascinated them. And that connects directly back to infinite games because infinite players are always internally motivated. They keep going because the process itself of playing the game matters to them, not just what's on the scoreboard. And that's why genuine curiosity is so powerful. External pressure, a desire to look in front of others, eventually burns out. Curiosity sustains itself. A curious person can learn forever, and Naval is deeply curious. You can hear it in the way he talks. He jumps between philosophy, science, technology, psychology, meditation, economics, evolution, happiness. And it's not just because he's trying to sound intellectual. It's because he genuinely wants to understand reality better. And all of this reminds me, honestly, right now of the Richard Feynman episode I did. Feynman had that same restless curiosity, the desire to understand things deeply rather than to perform intelligence socially. And interestingly enough, I think that both Naval and Feynman value simplicity. Not simplistic thinking, but clear thinking, because clarity is honestly one of the rarest qualities now. Most people live in constant cognitive noise, constant input, notifications, comparison, constant reaction from everybody. But Naval pushes heavily against that. He values solitude, going on long walks, reading books, thinking to yourself, silence. But not just in some aesthetic productivity way, not look at me drinking coffee and journaling. He values those things because clear thinking requires space. You can't hear your own thoughts if your brain is permanently crowded with the ideas of other people. And I think this is where Naval becomes more philosophical than entrepreneurial, because I think at their core, his ideas stop being about money. They become questions about your inner state, attention, peace, meaning. One of the most interesting things Naval says is that happiness is a skill, not a reward for doing well, but a skill. And honestly, that idea kind of bothered me the first time I heard it, because most of us are sort of conditioned to think that happiness comes after achievement. Like, I'll be happy when I get into school. I'll be happy when I get into this relationship. I'll be happy when I make enough money. I'll be happy when I become successful and at the top of my field. But if happiness is always something you get in the future, you never actually learn how to exist peacefully in the present. You just chain yourself to chase some ball endlessly, and chasing becomes your permanent emotional state. That's a finite loop. Infinite players eventually realize something much more important. You can't build a peaceful life on top of a permanently restless mind. That doesn't mean not being ambitious. Naval is incredibly ambitious, but his ambition is directed differently, towards freedom over attention, freedom over time, freedom over what games he participates in, because he makes a major distinction between wealth and status. Wealth is positive sum, status is zero sum. Wealth can be created, status depends on your position. If someone gains status, someone else often feels lower by comparison, which is why status games are psychologically exhausting. There's no endpoint, there's no victory, there's always somebody richer, smarter, more attractive, successful, recognized, but social media supercharges that instinct. You can compare yourself to millions of people instantly right now, which means that most people spend their lives emotionally reacting to scoreboards that they didn't consciously want to participate in. And I think that's why Naval's philosophy almost feels rebellious. He's pretty much saying, what if you stopped organizing your life around external validation? What if success was less about appearance and more about internal alignment? What if the goal wasn't to impress others, but to actually enjoy every single day? That kind of sounds obvious. Who doesn't want to enjoy their day? But most people genuinely don't live that way, or they can't live that way. A lot of people spend years climbing ladders they never even chose to climb themselves. Inherited definitions of success, inherited definitions of ambition, inherited metrics that they rely on, and they wake up exhausted under these metrics, ambitions, successes, without understanding why. Because achieving things without alignment, achieving these things under these already built systems feels empty. And I think that's the deepest connection between Naval Ravikant and Infinite games. Infinite players are careful about choosing the game itself. They're not just optimizing within some game already created. That's a completely different mindset. Because once you choose the right game, the process behind work stops feeling purely extractive. Your work is meaningful, learning is enjoyable, growth is lifelong, and curiosity, that's what sustains you. You stop constantly needing to escape. And honestly, I think that's one of the saddest realities in modern lives. A lot of people build lives that they constantly need relief from. They live for weekends, vacations, distractions, temporary escapes from a permanent life. But Naval talks about building a life where the default state itself feels good. It's not perfect, it's not effortless, but it's internally aligned, it's coherent. A life where your values, work, relationships, and time start aligning instead of fighting with each other. And I think that's the real goal. Not winning some final game, but building a life you can continue willingly. A life where the process itself becomes meaningful enough to become self-sustainable. That's what infinite thinking is. And I think that's why Naval resonates so deeply with so many people right now. Because beneath all that talk about startups, leverage, wealth, what he's really offering is a framework for escaping unconscious games, for thinking independently, for slowing down enough to ask, what do I actually want my life to feel like? What game do I want to keep playing? And maybe the best lives are not the ones that look most impressive from the outside, but maybe they're the ones that would willingly live again tomorrow. Thanks for listening.